So 2 weeks ago, we did Tresa Part 1. Last week, we sort of deviated a little bit and did all about designated representation. This week, we're going to synopsize Parts 2 and 3 of Tresa. And next week, we're going to do a simple overview of the whole of Tresa changes. So hopefully by the time this rolls around on December 1st, you're all going to be ready and tuned into all of the changes. And we will, of course, as managers, be available to all of you at any time to help you walk through this. OREA is still making changes to certain forms. We are all attending the training there to get you up and running and to be ready for December the 1st. Okay, so Tresa Parts 2 and 3. We're going to talk about disclosures, consents, and acknowledgements. We're going to talk about the contents of representation agreements, the contents of competing offers, access to real estate, and that's going to be an important one, and new code of ethics. So those are the items that we're going to be covering today. So the first thing is that Tresa emphasizes that all disclosures, consents, and acknowledgements must be clear, concise, and in plain language. Necessary disclosures include multiple representation when it occurs, conflicts of interest, any conflicts of interest, direct or indirect financial benefits, which means referral fees, or interest in the property, and material facts. With the emphasis through Tresa on disclosures, OREA is creating a new form that is called exactly that, disclosures. And it says disclosures in bold print. They don't want any skirting around anything that must be disclosed to a client. So we will be taking a look at that form when it is ready by OREA. The next item we're going to talk about is contents of representation agreements. And this is what's required in the contents of the agreements. And when you're looking at a listing agreement or at a BRA, it will be outlined very explicitly. Listing agreements look almost exactly the way they do now. But there will be emphasis on the date the agreement takes effect and the date it expires. People need to have their attention drawn to that. It's going to be required that services provided under the agreement will be outlined. Now, if you're offering a full service under a BRA or a listing agreement, you're not going to have to outline each and every service. It's just going to be full service. But under a limited service agreement, you're going to have to be very specific in what you are offering. And this goes back to designated representation and the fact that a self-represented party cannot receive services from you, and that you cannot collect remuneration from someone who is not under a service agreement with the brokerage. So you can give them a very limited service agreement so that you can charge them money. Method that the remuneration is calculated. So the listings must show the amount to the other brokerage. So if you're charging of a standard percentage, how much of that is being offered to the other brokerage? So that's going to have to be there as well. It's going to have to be very clear how you're going to calculate the commission you're earning. In other words, is it a percentage? Is it a flat fee? That's got to be there just as it does now. So that part of it is not any different. Terms of termination, if any. Is there going to be an agreement as to the termination of the agreement. Let's say it's a listing agreement, excuse me, or a buyer's representation agreement. If there are any terms for the termination, they have to be outlined. And circumstances when or if the remuneration changes. The way we do it now is that if you wish to give your seller a discount, if you bring your own buyer, you outline that in our Schedule A. We will have other circumstances set up for you if you wish to take advantage of them, such as if you are dealing with a self-represented party or anything along those lines. We will be setting up some examples of those for you. What have we got now? Sorry, I'm going to move this down. Contents of competing offers. Sharing the contents of competing offers is not open offers. A seller in writing may choose to or not to share contents of an offer with other competing offers. You're not just sharing those contents with anybody, you're sharing it with other competing offers. A seller may change their written direction at any time during the negotiating process and so notify the competing offers. So if a seller says, no, I'm not going to share any of the contents of the offer, but then partway through the negotiation decides he wants to let the other offers know that his top offer is, let's say, $1,550,000, then he has to change that direction in writing. Everybody has to be notified of it and notified of the changes. A seller may change their written direction at any time during the negotiating process and so notify the competing offers. Confidential information, such as the buyer's name or, let's say, an address, if it's included in a sale of buyer's property clause, cannot be disclosed. So you cannot disclose confidential information in any offer that you receive. And OREA is crafting a buyer's clause to keep the buyer's offers contents confidential. So if you have, let's say, 6 offers on the table and 5 of them are just normal offers, but the 6th one, the buyer has inserted a clause that their offer is to be kept confidential, then you must tell all 6 offers what it is that you are disclosing, but that one of the offers is keeping their information confidential. So we're waiting to see that clause. It is something that OREA will be crafting. And at that point, we will take a closer look at it. We've seen a couple of clauses already. One that was done by an outside lawyer. We don't feel that that is a satisfactory clause, and I'm sure the one OREA is working on, they have their lawyers working on it to make sure it's airtight. So that's where we stand with the contents of competing offers. Next is access to real estate. I'm going to say that this is extremely important, that although it has always been an obligation and common sense, Tresa's new legislation expressly prohibits providing anyone with access to property unless the registrant is present. It is now the law. You never could give out a lockbox code to a client to go on their own. That was always an ethical transgression. It is now the law, and fines are going to be huge for this. Any exceptions must be agreed to in writing by the owner. In other words, if the owner agrees to allow, let's say, an appraiser to go through, you need that in writing. And lockbox codes must be protected at all costs. Be very careful with this, and I will give you a quick synopsis that we have just recently dealt with, where the fine is outrageously high and could have been much higher, just to let you know. So be very careful with that. Our next slide is the new code of ethics. The new code of ethics focuses on ethical obligations. It always did, but it had portions in it that were really part of the legislation. So those have been removed and put right into the legislation. But now the new code of ethics, I believe, is about 15 items, and it all has to do with ethics. The discipline committee under Tresa has been beefed up. Their mandate and fines dealing with breaches of the legislation and ethics have also been beefed up. Fines are huge now. And references in the new code of ethics are labeled as sections. So I'm going to go through them. I've just given you titles here, but I'm going to read you what each item deals with, and then we'll be open for questions. So the first one, and I'm moving my little bar here because it's getting in the way. The first section deals with integrity, honesty, good faith, etc. It requires that in carrying on business, a registrant shall act with courtesy, honesty, good faith, and integrity in relation to every person that the registrant deals with. That means consumers, it means other agents, it means self-represented parties, it's everyone. The next one is unprofessional conduct. And this is expanded to address conduct that would be reasonably regarded as being disgraceful, dishonorable, unprofessional, or unbecoming a registrant, or likely to bring the real estate sector into disrepute, or to undermine public confidence in the regulation of registrants under the Act. So this one is very, very broad. And if you are brought up in front of RICO and there is nothing specific that they can charge you with, however, you've done something that we all know is dishonorable, they will throw this one at most people, which is unprofessional conduct. So be careful of that. The next one is no counseling of contraventions. It explicitly prohibits counseling, advising, or knowingly assisting a person to contravene the act. So you cannot advise someone else's clients on how to get out of a BRA. That's probably the most common one I can think of, but you have to be very careful when you're dealing with the public and with other agents not to counsel contraventions of the Act. The next one deals with fraud. Again, fraudulent behavior is not new, but the reference to fraud is now separated from errors and misrepresentations and unethical practices. It is a charge that can be brought against a registrant as an individual charge, not just lumped in with other things. 5 is misrepresentations. Registrants are expected to treat every person in a manner that would comply with the Human Rights Code. Okay, and I know sometimes things that are said can be taken in the wrong light and in the wrong manner, but be careful that you are not accused of discrimination in your conversations with people. Intimidation, coercion, etc. The Code of Ethics prohibits abuse and harassment and broadens to include any conduct that is intimidating, coercive, or would be considered undue pressure. So you can see by the first 7 that they're really broadening their scope. Okay. The next one is best interests. There's a new requirement that applies if a registrant believes that their client's ability to understand information or make decisions relevant to the trade may be impaired. In that case, registrants are required to make reasonable efforts to ensure that the client understands the information and appreciates the foreseeable consequences of the decision. All right, this is one that uses some judgment, but understand that it is there. And registrants are still required to promote and protect the best interests of their client. The next one is conscientious and competent service. This section requires a registrant to provide conscientious, courteous, and responsive service to clients and demonstrate reasonable knowledge, skill, judgment, and competence in providing service. It also calls for reasonable knowledge, skill, judgment, and competence in providing opinions, advice, or assistance or information to any person. So if you don't know what you're talking about on a certain subject, please don't offer your opinions about it. Always, there is never any shame in saying, I'm not quite sure, but let me find out for you. So you would seek the knowledge from somebody who does know before you pass it on. Section 10 is dealings with self-represented parties, and I'm going to read this verbatim. It addresses dealing with self-represented parties, covered in the first video of this series, which is part 1. We did address self-represented parties in part 1. What is that? 3 weeks ago. And as a reminder, registrants must not, in respect of a trade, provide services, opinions, or advice to a self-represented party, or encourage a self-represented party to rely on the registrant's knowledge, skill, or judgment. Okay, we're going to deal more with self-represented parties, especially as circumstances come up, but I encourage you to go into the AREA courses or the RICO courses, the videos about self-represented parties. You must be very careful with them. They are just normal consumers, though. Remember, they're consumers until they declare they are a self-represented party or that they intend to be. Okay. Section 11, services from others. Registrants are still required to advise a person to obtain services from another person if they are not able to provide the services with reasonable knowledge, skill, judgment, and competence, or if they are not authorized by law to provide the services. So always refer your client to an expert, to a lawyer, or to someone who is, I guess, who specializes in the service that they require. All right. Confidentiality. This section is new and addresses confidentiality. Except as otherwise authorized or required by law, a registrant must not disclose to a third party any confidential information of a client without the client's written consent. Confidentiality is a key component of client relationships and continues after the client relationship ends. So perfect example of this is you list a property for sale. Your clients are perhaps seeking a divorce. One is living in the home, one is not. You do not tell a cooperating broker that you need 24 hours notice because you need to contact the other party who has moved out. You don't disclose private information or confidential information about your clients. 13, conflicts. Registrants are prohibited from providing services, including representation, to a client or continuing to provide services to a client where the interests of the registrant conflict or may conflict with the client, unless this is disclosed as a potential conflict, unless you have advised the client or prospective client to seek independent legal professional advice, etc., or that you have taken that you have taken all reasonable steps to ensure that the client has demonstrated a reasonable understanding of the conflict or potential conflict of interest. You then have to obtain consent in writing. This is a big one when it comes to multiple representation. Tresa is truly trying to have you avoid multiple representation unless both parties really are completely aware of your limited ability to give information, advice, etc. Any sort of a perceived conflict of interest must be disclosed in writing to your clients. That you have to make sure they understand. You have to make sure that you've advised and disclosed. Okay. Dealing with clients of other registrants. This is now part of our code of ethics. It's not new, but it just brings to your attention that registrants are still required to communicate information through the registrant representing a person unless the other registrant has consented in writing to communicating directly with their client. So no, you cannot go directly to somebody else's client to communicate without that agent's written authorization to do so. Then we're going on to our last slide, which is no obstruction. No obstruction is new. Registrants are prohibited from obstructing or attempting to obstruct the administration of the legislation. Okay, this includes not obstructing a person from making a complaint to RICO. You cannot stop the general public if they wish to make a complaint to RICO. You can't obstruct that. It also includes not obstructing RICO from receiving accurate or complete information in respect of a complaint. So what they're saying is you can't lie to RICO. You have to tell them the truth. What else? The next one is that you have a duty to ensure compliance. Again, this is not new. Brokerages are still required to ensure that every salesperson and broker the brokerage employs carries out their duties in compliance with the code. The broker of record, that's me, must ensure that the brokerage complies with the code. So when you're seeing all of our requirements at the end of a deal or at our front desk when you're handing in a deal, it's because we as a brokerage are required to make sure that our registrants comply. And we do that to the best of our ability. And we are here to protect you, protect the brokerage, and keep it all going.